What happens when the kindness of a stranger is worth more than blood in a cold ER? Vivian Blackwood realized she was utterly alone. The sons she loved dearly had chosen a party over being by her side in a life-or-death moment, but she wasn't entirely alone. Someone else was there, a complete stranger who offered her the one thing her own children had refused: genuine compassion. That small act of kindness planted a seed in her mind. A bold and unshakable idea. An idea to transfer the entire legacy her sons took for granted into the hands of someone they had never met. What happens next? Make sure to subscribe to Deepu Kader Stories. Hit like. And let me know what city you're watching from. If you were in her situation, would you dare to bet your entire fortune on the kindness of a stranger? The sound of a beating heart. My name is Vivian Blackwood. I am 72 years old. And my entire fortune is going to a stranger. It's because last night, for 4 minutes, I was dead. And my sons, my own flesh and blood, chose a party instead of me. That's the beginning and the end of the story. Really. The rest is just details. But I suppose the details are important. They are the bricks that built the wall between us. The first thing I heard when I came back was not a kind word. It was a sound. A machine. Beep. 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 A cold, electronic pulse, doing the work for a heart that had given up. My heart? The doctor called my sons, Edward and Paul, as soon as I was stable. I know he did. Because I asked the nurse, a young woman named Ava, did they say when they would be here? My voice was a dry rasp. It didn't sound like mine. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That's how I knew. She busied herself with a clear bag of fluid hanging by my bed. The doctor spoke with your eldest son, Mrs. Blackwood, and I pushed. The single word took all my strength. She finally looked at me. Her expression, a careful mixture of pity and professionalism. And he said, "We can't come. My wife is throwing a birthday party, and we can't just abandon our guests. Mom's fine. She always pulls through. The flask came's the greeted of kinded. The flask came's the shapted. She always pulls through." The words hit me harder than the heart attack itself. It was not just a rejection. It was a dismissal. My life, hanging by a thread thinner than a spider's silk, was an inconvenience to their social calendar. My strength, the very thing that had carried them their whole lives, was now the justification for their abandonment. I turned my head and stared at the wall. I saw it all with a terrible, new clarity. I saw the $1,000 suit Edward would be wearing. I saw the perfectly arranged appetizers my daughter-in-law had spent weeks planning. I saw Paul, my charming boy, raising a glass of champagne to toast her, while I lay here, tasting nothing but antiseptic and the metallic tang of my own mortality. They weren't just at a party. They were at a party 30 minutes away. 30 minutes. I had been dead for 4 of them, in the profound silence of that room, with only the machine for company. Something inside me didn't just break, it shattered. It turned to dust. The unconditional love of a mother, the thing I thought was indestructible, vanished. And in its place, something cold and hard and clear began to form. It was a decision. The nurse, Ava, came back into the room a while later. She checked my vitals, her touch gentle. "Is there anyone else you'd like us to call for you?" "Mrs. Blackwood, a friend, another family member." I looked at her. This stranger who had shown me more compassion in the last hour than my own children had in the last decade. And I knew the answer. The truth had been there all along. I just hadn't been ready to see it. "No," I said, and my voice was steady now. It was the voice of a woman who had just signed a death certificate. The death certificate of the mother she used to be. "There's no one. But I will need to call my lawyer in the morning. I have an amendment to make to my will." I watched the surprise flicker in her eyes before she could hide it. She probably thought I was delirious from the medication. I wasn't delirious. For the first time in years, I was seeing things exactly as they were. My life's work. My legacy. The fortune my husband Robert and I had built from nothing. It needed a new home. A worthy home. And it certainly was not going to be with the 2 men who chose canapes over their mother's last heartbeat. The house that Robert built, lying in that hospital bed. The only thing I could hear was the steady, lonely beep of the heart monitor. Beep, 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 It was a sound that measured life. But for me, it was counting down the seconds of a life that was already over. The life of Vivian Blackwood, the mother. To understand the decision I made in that cold, white room, you have to understand what came before. You have to understand about Robert. My Robert, he wasn't a man of fancy words. His hands were calloused from the workshop, smelling faintly of sawdust and ambition. We started Blackwood Enterprises with nothing but a rusty saw, a loan from my father that we paid back in 6 months, and a shared dream. We weren't building a company. We were building a life. Our house. Our third child. I remember nights spent hunched over the kitchen table. Me with the accounting books. Him with his design sketches. Edward would be asleep upstairs. A toddler then. And Paul wasn't even a thought yet. The smell of coffee and Robert's pipe tobacco, that was the smell of our beginning. Blackwood Enterprises wasn't just a name on a building. It was our sweat, our arguments, our laughter. It was the nights I fell asleep at my desk and woke up with a blanket draped over my shoulders by Robert. It was the pride in his eyes the day we signed the papers to buy the first real factory. He turned to me, his big hand covering mine, and said, "We did it. Viv, this is for them. For the boys, everything was for the boys. But a legacy built on love can be fractured by secrets. Robert was a good man, the best man, but he was not a perfect man. The cancer took him quickly. In the end, it was just the two of us. In another cold, white room. Not so different from this one. The beeping of the machines was the same. The smell of antiseptic was the same. The night before he passed, he held my hand. His grip was weak, a shadow of its former strength, he whispered, his voice thin as paper. "Vivian, I have to tell you something." I leaned closer. "What is it?" "My love, I have a daughter." The words just hung there. A daughter. I thought he was confused. The medication talking, but his eyes were clear, terribly clear. "Her name is Ava," he breathed. "Her mother, she passed away when the child was born. I've provided for her. Viv, always. But I was a coward. I was never brave enough to tell you, to risk what we had." His eyes filled with tears. "Please, forgive me." I sat there, his secret a sudden, crushing weight on my chest. A daughter. A whole other life he had lived in the shadows. But looking at his face, the face I had loved for 30 years, I couldn't find anger. All I could find was a profound, bottomless sadness. For him, for me, for the girl named Ava. I squeezed his hand. "There is nothing to forgive." "Robert," I lied, and in that moment, I took his secret and buried it deep inside me. Another thing to pull through from. After he was gone, the business became my sole focus. It was the last piece of him I had left. I made sure Edward and Paul had the best education, the best opportunities. I handed the reins over to Edward when I thought he was ready. He had Robert's ambition, but not his caution. Paul had Robert's charm, but not his work ethic. They saw the company as a birthright, a bank account. They didn't see the ghost of their father walking the factory floor. They didn't hear his voice in the hum of the machinery. They started making changes, risky investments, big, flashy projects that looked good on paper but had no soul. They saw the house that Robert built not as a home to be protected, but as a property to be mortgaged. I tried to warn them. I would bring it up at our Sunday dinners. The last little ritual I clung to. "Edward, are you sure about this merger? The numbers don't feel right." He would pat my hand. A condescending little gesture. "Don't worry. Mother, the market is different now. You have to be aggressive." They stopped listening. Then, they stopped inviting me to board meetings. Then, the Sunday dinners became less frequent. Now, lying here, I understand. That very important party wasn't just a party. It was a lifeline. It was a desperate attempt to woo an investor, to plug a hole in the sinking ship they had created. They weren't just choosing a party over me. They were choosing their own pride. They were trying to save the company they had all but destroyed, the legacy of the father they had disappointed. And in their panic, they forgot the one thing Robert never did. That a house, no matter how grand, is nothing without a foundation. And I was their foundation. And they had let me crumble. A glass of water. The hours after that decision were strange. The anger didn't vanish, but it settled. It cooled from a raging fire into a block of solid ice in my chest. I was no longer waiting for the phone to ring. I was no longer listening for footsteps in the hallway. The hope was gone. And in its place was a profound, almost peaceful emptiness. I felt disconnected. A ship whose mooring lines had been cut. Adrift in a silent, gray sea. The machines kept beeping. Nurses came and went, their voices a soft murmur in the background. They spoke about blood pressure, about medication, about keeping me comfortable. But comfort was a distant country I could no longer find on a map. It was late, past midnight. I think. The hospital grew quieter. The frantic energy of the emergency room had faded, replaced by the hushed, steady rhythm of the night shift. My mouth was dry, a desert of gauze and medicine. My throat felt like I had swallowed sand. I tried to reach for the plastic pitcher on the bedside table, but my arm felt like it was filled with lead. A weak, pathetic gesture. I let it fall back onto the starched white sheet. And then, she was there, the nurse. Ava. She had come in so quietly I hadn't noticed. She didn't ask what was wrong. She saw the clumsy reach, the dry parting of my lips. Without a word, she poured a cup of water from the pitcher, slipped a plastic straw into it, and held it for me. Just a small sip. "Mrs. Blackwood," she whispered. The water was cool. It was just ordinary hospital water, probably from a tap down the hall. But at that moment, it felt like a miracle, a blessing. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me all day. I took a sip, and then another. She held the cup patiently, steady as a rock, until I had had enough. "Thank you." I rasped. "You're welcome," she said, placing the cup back on the table. Within my reach this time, she adjusted my pillow. Her movements were sure, but gentle. As she leaned over, a stray strand of her dark, curly hair fell across her cheek. She tucked it back behind her ear, and her hand brushed against the cuff of my hospital gown. Her skin was warm. She started to check the readings on the monitor, her back to me. The silence stretched. The emptiness I had been feeling began to fill with something else. It was shame, not for my decision, but shame that this stranger, this girl young enough to be my granddaughter, was showing me the basic human decency my own sons had denied me. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped the corner of my eye and traced a slow path down my temple, disappearing into my hairline. I thought she hadn't noticed, but she turned back, and her eyes, they were soft. She picked up a tissue from the box on the table and gently, so gently, dabbed the tear away. And then she did something I will never forget. She reached out and took my hand, my old, wrinkled hand, with its protruding veins and age spots. She just held it. Her hand was small, but strong. It was not the touch of a nurse. I've known the touch of nurses, efficient, clinical, reassuring, but distant. This was different. This was the touch of one human being to another. It was a touch that said, "I see you. I know you're in pain, and you are not alone." We stayed like that for a long moment. Me, the old, abandoned mother, her, the young, kind-hearted stranger. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of the machine that was keeping me alive. I looked at her face properly for the first time. The fluorescent lights of the hospital are cruel. They strip away all warmth, all color. But even in that harsh glare, I could see she had a lovely face, strong cheekbones, a determined chin. But it was her eyes that held me. They were a warm, deep brown, the color of rich earth after a rain. And as I looked into them, my own failing heart gave a strange little flutter, a jolt that had nothing to do with my condition. There was something in the way she tilted her head as she listened, something in the gentle curve of her smile, something familiar, something of Robert. The thought came out of nowhere, a ghost from a past I had locked away. I dismissed it instantly. Of course not. It was the medication. It was the shock. It was the grief playing tricks on an old woman's mind. Robert had been gone for 20 years. This was just a nice girl, doing her job, nothing more. But the image had been planted, a tiny seed of impossible familiarity. It lodged itself in my mind, a question mark at the end of a long, Painful sentence. She squeezed my hand once more. A gentle pressure. You try to get some rest now. Mrs. Blackwood, she said. She let go of my hand and walked out of the room. As quietly as she had come in. I was alone again, but the coldness had receded. Just a little, pushed back by the warmth of a simple glass of water, and the touch of a stranger's hand. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to stop and ask you something. Has a small act of kindness from a stranger ever meant more to you than 1,000 words from your own family? I would truly love to hear your story. Please, share it in the comments below. Knowing I'm not alone on this journey, it helps. It helps more than you know. The sound of a pen on paper. They discharged me on a Tuesday. The doctor gave me a list of instructions, a handful of prescriptions, and a soft, sympathetic smile. He told me to go home, to rest, to avoid any stress. I smiled back. A thin, brittle thing. I had no intention of going home. Rest could wait. Stress, I had learned, was simply a sign that something needed to be done. The first thing I did as a free woman was hail a taxi, not to my quiet, empty house filled with ghosts and memories, but downtown, to the granite and glass building where Mr. Davies had his office. Arthur Davies had been our family's lawyer for 40 years. He had drafted the first contracts for Blackwood Enterprises on a second-hand typewriter. He had handled Robert's will. He was a man of caution and tradition, a man who believed in the sanctity of bloodlines and legacies. I knew he would not make this easy. His receptionist, a young woman who looked at me with wide, concerned eyes, tried to stop me. Mrs. Blackwood, you should be at home. Mr. Davies is booked all day. He'll see me, I said, and walked past her desk. My steps were slow, but steady. Each one was a choice. Arthur was standing by his window, looking out over the city Robert and I had helped build. He turned when I entered, his face a mask of professional concern that quickly morphed into genuine shock. Vivian, my God. What are you doing here? I heard about what happened. You should be resting. I've rested enough. Arthur, I said, lowering myself into one of the plush leather chairs that faced his enormous oak desk. The chair sighed under my weight. I need you to do something for me. He sat down, folding his hands on the desk. Of course, anything. Do the boys need some legal advice? Is the company is theirs to ruin. I cut in, my voice flat. This isn't about the company, not directly. This is about my will. A flicker of understanding. Then, disbelief crossed his face. He leaned forward. Your will, Vivian? It's airtight. Robert and I made sure of it. Everything is to be divided equally between Edward and Paul upon your passing. The shares, the properties, the trust. It's as it should be. As it was, I corrected him. I want to change it. All of it. He stared at me. The grandfatherly concern was gone, replaced by the sharp, analytical gaze of a lawyer. Change it how? I want you to draft a new will and a new living trust. Effective immediately. I took a breath. The air in his office was thick with the smell of old books and money. I want Edward Blackwood and Paul Blackwood removed. Completely. He actually flinched. He sat back in his chair as if my words had physically pushed him. Removed, Vivian. What are you talking about? They are your sons. They're your only family. Are they? The question was quiet, but it filled the room. Family doesn't leave you to die alone in an emergency room because they have a party to attend. Arthur. He looked down at his folded hands. He was a good man, but he was a man of order. This was chaos. Vivian. This is an extreme decision. You've just been through a terrible ordeal. Perhaps you should give it some time. Give the boys a chance to what I interrupted. And my voice was cold now, sharp as a shard of glass. To explain, to apologize. Their chance was a phone call when I was lying on a gurney, not knowing if I would see the next sunrise. They made their choice. Now, I am making mine. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. So you have a choice as well. Arthur, you can draft the papers, or I will find a lawyer who will. I saw the fight go out of him. He knew that look in my eyes. It was the same look I had when I'd faced down the board of directors after Robert died. The look that said there was no room for negotiation. He sighed. A long, weary sound. He pulled a yellow legal pad towards him. All right. Vivian, tell me what you want to do. I want everything, I said, my voice steady as a rock. Every share of my stock, the house, the savings and investment portfolios, all of it is to be placed into a new, irrevocable trust, he wrote, his pen scratching against the paper. The sound was methodical, final. And the beneficiaries of this trust, I paused. For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty pierced my resolve. I saw a pair of kind, brown eyes. I felt the gentle pressure of a hand on my arm. A stranger. I am still in the process of verifying the recipient, I said, the words coming to me as I spoke them. For now, you will leave that section blank. The trust will have a sole trustee, me, and a sole beneficiary, to be named by me at a later date. Arthur stopped writing. He looked up, his face etched with confusion. Leave it blank, Vivian. That's highly unusual. It leaves the entire estate vulnerable. The estate is already vulnerable, I said, thinking of Edward's reckless deals and Paul's extravagant tastes. This is the only way to protect it. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He saw a grieving, angry mother making a rash decision. He didn't see the truth. He didn't see a woman who had finally realized that blood is not a bond. It's just a fluid. And sometimes, it runs thin, very thin. He shook his head. But he kept writing. The scratching of his pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of an empire changing hands, the sound of a lifetime being rewritten. It was the sound of a pen on paper. But it felt like the gavel of a judge, and the verdict was in. The smell of cheap flowers. They came 3 days after I returned home. 3 days. It took them 72 hours to drive the 30 minutes across town. I was in the sunroom, tending to my roses, when I saw Edward's sleek, black car pull into the driveway. I watched them get out. Edward, tall and imposing in a dark suit, even on a Saturday, and Paul, trying to look casual in a polo shirt that was a size too tight for him. He was holding a bouquet of flowers. I did not go to the door. I let them use their key. I heard the lock turn, heard their footsteps in the hall. They found me in the sunroom, snippers in hand, trimming a dead leaf from my favorite Queen Elizabeth rose bush. Mom. It was Edward who spoke first. His voice was carefully neutral, the voice he used for difficult board meetings. Edward. Paul, I said, not turning around. I snipped another leaf with a satisfying click. You found your way. Paul stepped forward and placed the flowers on the small glass table next to my armchair. They were carnations, the cheap kind, wrapped in crackly cellophane. The kind you grab from a bucket by the checkout counter at the grocery store. Some of the petals were already browning at the edges. They smelled of nothing but cold refrigeration. I had a vase on the mantelpiece filled with roses from my garden, their fragrance rich and sweet. The contrast was telling. We're so sorry, Mom. Paul began, his voice oozing with a practiced sincerity that no longer worked on me. We were so worried. We should have been there. I finally turned to look at them. I looked at my sons, the boys I had rocked to sleep, whose fevers I had cooled with damp cloths, whose scraped knees I had bandaged. I looked at the men they had become, men who stood awkwardly in my sunroom, their eyes darting everywhere but at my face. I sat down in my armchair. I did not invite them to sit. I simply waited. My silence, I've learned, makes them more uncomfortable than any accusation I could ever voice. It was Edward who broke it, clearing his throat. Mom, about the other night, about the party. You need to understand. Oh, I said, my voice quiet. Help me understand. Edward, he took a deep breath, shifting his weight from one expensive leather shoe to the other. It wasn't just a party. It was a meeting. With Arthur Thompson. The name meant nothing to me. He's an investor, Edward continued, his voice gaining momentum now that he was on familiar ground. Business. Numbers. Things he understood far better than people. The biggest one in the state. Paul and we've been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months. This party was our only chance. Blackwood Enterprises. Mom, it's in trouble. Bad trouble. I continued to look at him, my expression unchanging. I felt nothing, no surprise, no pity. It was like watching a play I had already read the script for. A rather dull, predictable play. Paul jumped in, eager to support his brother. If we didn't secure that investment from Thompson, the company wouldn't make it through the next quarter. We would lose everything. Everything Dad and you built. He had the audacity to look sentimental when he said that. We did it to protect your legacy. Our legacy. Your legacy. They had used that phrase before. In that cold, sterile hospital room. But now, hearing it in my own home, surrounded by the scent of my own roses, it sounded even more hollow. They spoke of my legacy, but they had no idea what it was. They thought it was a number on a balance sheet. They thought it was the company name etched on a glass door downtown. They didn't understand that my legacy was supposed to be them. Their character, their compassion, and by that measure, they had already squandered it all. I remained silent. I let their words hang in the air. Let them hear the echo of their own pathetic excuses. I watched Paul fidget with his car keys. I watched Edward check his phone. A quick, almost imperceptible glance down before he caught my eye and slipped it back into his pocket. Old habits. So you see, Mom, Edward said, his tone suggesting the matter was now closed. That any reasonable person would surely understand. We had no choice. No choice. I thought of the choice I made 35 years ago, when I was offered a buyout for my controlling shares after Robert died. A generous offer that would have set me up for life. Free and clear. I chose to stay. I chose to work 18-hour days to learn an industry I knew little about. To earn the respect of men who thought I was just a grieving widow. I chose my son's future over my own freedom. I thought of the choice I made in the hospital, listening to the beep of a machine. I see, I said finally. My voice was calm. So calm, it seemed to spook them. They had come prepared for tears. For anger. For a dramatic scene. They were not prepared for this quiet, unshakable stillness. They stayed for another 10 minutes. They spoke about the weather, about the stock market, about Paul's daughter getting braces. They talked at me. Not to me. I was just a piece of furniture in the room, a silent witness to their lives. Finally, Edward looked at his watch. Well, we should get going. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. I am okay, I said, and it was the truest thing I had said all day. They moved towards the door, relieved. Their duty was done. They had checked the box, visited the sick mother. They could go back to their important lives now with a clear conscience. At the doorway, Edward turned back. He gave me a small, confident smile, the kind of smile he gave shareholders after a good quarter. Everything's going to be fine. Mom, he said, you'll see. I watched them walk down the path, get into the black car, and drive away, leaving behind nothing but the faint, cloying smell of their cheap flowers. I looked at the browning carnations, and then at my vibrant, living roses, and I thought to myself, yes, Edward, everything is going to be fine, but not in the way you think. A name in a database. For 3 days after my visit to Arthur Davies, I stayed inside my house. I did not rest. I moved through the quiet rooms like a ghost, touching the things Robert had loved, the worn leather of his reading chair, the heavy crystal decanter on the sideboard. The house was a museum of a life that no longer existed. My boys did not call, not once. I suppose they thought that their little visit, with their wilting flowers and their pathetic excuses, had been enough. They had done their duty. They could go back to their busy lives, their important parties, and the slow, steady work of running their father's legacy into the ground. During those 3 days, a thought kept returning to me. It was not a logical thought. It was a whisper, a flicker at the edge of my mind. It was the face of the young nurse in the emergency room, Ava. There was something in the way she had tilted her head when she listened, something in the shape of her eyes. A warm, deep brown that felt familiar. I told myself it was the medication, the trauma, an old woman's mind playing tricks on her, but the thought would not leave. It was a splinter under the skin, a constant, dull ache. By the 4th day, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I was a businesswoman, not a fortune teller. I dealt in facts, in numbers on a spreadsheet, intangible assets. This feeling, this strange, unexplainable pull towards a stranger. It was not my way, and so I decided to deal with it the only way I knew how. With research, I did not hire a private investigator. That would leave a paper trail, a record. This was a secret I had kept for Robert for 20 years. I would not expose it now to some man in a cheap suit. No, this had to be my own work. I sat down at Robert's old desk, the polished mahogany cool beneath my hands. I opened my laptop, and I made a phone call. George Carmichael had worked at the city records office for 30 years. His son and my, Paul, had played on the same Little League team. He owed me a small favor from a long time ago. One of those quiet arrangements people in our position sometimes make for each other. I had never called it in. Until now. George, I said, my voice warm, friendly. The voice of the old Vivian. It's Vivian Blackwood. I hope I'm not disturbing you. He was, of course, happy to hear from me. We spoke about the weather, about his grandchildren, about the good old days. Then, I got to the point. George, I'm doing a bit of philanthropic work. Quietly. You understand? I'm trying to locate a distant relative who may have fallen on hard times. It's a delicate situation, of course. Vivian, how can I help? I need to find a birth record. I said, keeping my voice level. The name is Ava Harrison. I don't have a date of birth, but I believe she would be around 30 years old. It was a long shot. Harrison is a common name, but I gave him the name of the hospital where I'd been. A place where many city employees are born. It was a starting point. He promised he would look into it. Discreetly, I spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation. I watered my roses. I paid some bills. I made a pot of tea I didn't drink. Every time the phone rang, my heart, my treacherous, fragile heart, would give a painful lurch. The call came just after 5 o'clock. Vivian, George said, his voice all business now. I found something. There's only one Ava Harrison born at General Hospital in that time frame, 31 years ago. I held my breath. My knuckles were white where I gripped the receiver. Go on. I'm emailing you the scanned file now, he said. As we agreed, this conversation never happened. The line went dead. A moment later, I heard the soft chime of an email arriving. My hands trembled as I moved the mouse and clicked open the attachment. It was a standard city birth certificate, a digital copy, slightly blurry, but the words were clear. Name Ava Harrison. Date of birth October 12th. Place of birth City General Hospital. And then I saw the box that made the world stop. Mother's name, Laura Mayhew. Father's name, left blank, Laura Mayhew. The name Robert had whispered in a haze of morphine and regret. The name I had pushed down into the deepest, darkest part of my memory. Laura Mayhew. The blood rushed in my ears. A roaring sound like the ocean. My screen went blurry. It wasn't a trick of the mind. It wasn't a coincidence. It was real. The whisper in my head was no longer a whisper. It was a voice, and it sounded like Robert's. My daughter. Her name is Ava. I sat there in the deepening twilight of Robert's study for a long, long time. The house was completely silent. I did not cry. I did not feel rage. The time for that had passed 20 years ago. In another quiet, sterile room, what I felt now was something far more profound. It was the feeling of a cosmic scale, tipping, of a debt, long overdue, finally being called in. So, she was real. Robert's daughter was real. And in the darkest night of my life, while the sons I had raised, the sons who bore my name and my husband's name, abandoned me for a party, Robert's daughter, the girl I never knew existed, had been there. She had given me a glass of water, a dinner for two. It took me a week to gather the courage, a full week. Vivian Blackwood, who had faced down hostile corporate boards and stared into the abyss of financial ruin without flinching, was terrified of making a simple phone call. My hand hovered over the receiver countless times. What would I say? What if she thought I was some lonely, eccentric old woman? What if she said no? Finally, I decided a phone call was too impersonal, too easy for her to refuse. This had to be done face to face. I drove myself to the hospital, I wore my good navy blue dress, the one Robert always liked, and a string of simple pearls. I even put on a little lipstick. I felt like a teenager preparing for her first dance. It was ridiculous. And yet, my heart hammered against my ribs with a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. I carried a small, gift-wrapped box. Inside was a silk scarf, elegant and understated. A token, an excuse. I found her at the nurse's station, writing in a chart. She looked tired. The harsh hospital lights cast shadows under her eyes. But she still had an aura of calm competence about her. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Miss Harrison." She looked up, a polite, professional smile on her face, then her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's so good to see you up and about. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling much better. Thank you," I said, my hands clutching the small box. "Entirely thanks to the excellent care I received here." I placed the box on the counter. "This is just a small something to say thank you for everything." She looked flustered. "Oh, you really don't have to. It's my job. Some people just do their job," I replied, meeting her gaze, "and some people do it with a kindness that makes all the difference." "You made a difference." Ava, using her first name, felt natural. "I was wondering if you might allow me to thank you properly. Would you let me take you to dinner one evening?" She was taken aback. I could see the hesitation, the surprise. She probably had a dozen reasons to say no. A busy schedule, a boyfriend, a simple desire not to spend her free time with an old patient. I don't know," she stammered. "It would mean a great deal to me." I said, keeping my voice gentle, "I don't get out much these days. It would be a pleasure to have some good company." She looked at my face, and whatever she saw there seemed to make her decision. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Okay, Mrs. Blackwood, I'd like that." We went to Antonio's, an old Italian place downtown. It's quiet, with soft lighting and white tablecloths. A place Robert and I used to go for special occasions. I wanted a place where we could talk, where the noise of the world wouldn't intrude. She arrived wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. Out of her scrubs, she looked even younger, but also more whole. She was nervous. I could tell. She kept smoothing down her dress, unsure of what to expect. I made sure to put her at ease, asking about the restaurant, the wine, simple things. As the evening wore on, she began to relax, and I began to see the person behind the nurse's uniform. I learned that she had grown up just outside the city, raised by a single mother who had passed away a few years ago. She had worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. She spoke of her mother with a deep, quiet love that made something ache in my chest. "She was my everything," Ava said, looking down at her water glass. "She worked as a seamstress, always smelled of thread and chalk. She was the strongest person I ever knew." "And your father?" I asked, my voice carefully casual. My heart was beating a little too fast. She shook her head, a sad little smile on her face. "I never knew him. Mom never talked about him. She just said he was a good man, but that things were complicated." Complicated. Yes, that was a word Robert would have used. She didn't speak with bitterness or self-pity, only a quiet acceptance. This was the hand life had dealt her, and she had played it with grace and strength. She spoke about her work with a passion that was palpable. She didn't talk about the long hours or the difficult patients. She talked about the little victories, the elderly man whose hand she held as he passed peacefully, the frightened child she made laugh with a silly face, the families she comforted in their darkest hours. "It's not just about the medicine," she said, her brown eyes earnest and bright. "Sometimes, it's just about being there, making sure someone knows they're not invisible." Not invisible. The words resonated deep within me. That was exactly how I had felt in that hospital bed. An invisible woman, a ghost in my own life. And she had seen me. I found myself comparing her, in my mind, to my sons. Edward saw the world as a series of transactions, of wins and losses. Paul saw it as a stage, a place to be liked and admired. Neither of them saw the small, quiet moments that made up a life. They didn't see the value in simply being there. As the waiter cleared our dessert plates, I looked across the table at this remarkable young woman. This stranger who carried my husband's eyes, this daughter I never knew I had. My decision, made in the cold fury of a hospital room, no longer felt like an act of revenge. It felt like an act of destiny, of rightness. Ava, I said. And she looked up from her coffee. If you could do anything in the world, anything at all, what would your biggest dream be? She blushed a little, as if the question was too grand. Oh, I don't know. It sounds silly. Nothing sounds silly tonight. I encouraged her. She took a deep breath. Well, I've always dreamed of opening a small, free clinic, just a little place, for the elderly who don't have anyone, people who fall through the cracks, a place where they could get a hot meal, have their blood pressure checked, and just have someone to talk to for an hour, a place where they wouldn't be invisible. I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The final piece of the puzzle, the one I didn't even know I was looking for, slid perfectly into place. In that quiet Italian restaurant, over the remnants of tiramisu and coffee, a legacy was passed, not with a document or a declaration, but with a shared dream. Ava had no idea that her answer had just sealed her fate, and the fate of my sons. The dinner ended. We said our goodbyes, and I knew exactly what I had to do. If you are still listening, please, do me a favor and comment with the listening below. It's just to let me know that there are friends walking this path with me. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part of my life's story. The final signature. The morning after my dinner with Ava, I woke up before the sun. I did not feel tired. I did not feel the familiar ache in my chest. I felt calm. A deep, quiet calm I hadn't felt in years. I knew what I had to do. The path forward was no longer a tangled mess of anger and grief. It was a single, straight line. I dressed carefully, not in the soft sweaters I usually wore around the house, but in a tailored navy blue suit, the kind I used to wear to board meetings. I put on the simple pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not a victim. She was not a heartbroken mother. She was Vivian Blackwood, co-founder of Blackwood Enterprises, and she was about to make the most important business decision of her life. I didn't call ahead. I walked into Arthur Davies' office at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning. Just as he was settling in with his first cup of coffee, he looked up, and the color drained from his face. He knew this was not a social call. Vivian, he said, rising slowly. I wasn't expecting you. I know, I said, taking the same leather chair I had sat in before. It didn't feel so imposing this time. I'm here to finish what we started. I'm ready to name the beneficiary. He sat down, his movements cautious. He folded his hands on the polished desk. A barrier between us. Vivian, have you thought this through? Truly, once this is done, it is very, very difficult to undo. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Arthur, I said, my voice even and clear. Please, take out the documents. He hesitated for a long moment, then sighed and opened a thick file on his desk. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, bound in a dark blue cover. The last will and testament of Vivian Blackwood. It looked so official, so final. He slid the documents across the desk towards me, along with a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. The line for the sole beneficiary of the trust is here, he said, pointing with a manicured finger. As you requested. It is blank. I looked at the empty line. A whole life's work. A legacy built with love and sacrifice. All waiting to be directed by a few strokes of a pen. Get ready to write. Arthur, I said, not looking up. The name is Ava, spelled A-V-A. He picked up his own pen, poised over a notepad. The last name is Harrison. I continued, spelled H-A-R-R-I-I-S-O-N. I heard him suck in a sharp breath. His pen stopped moving. I finally lifted my eyes to meet his. His face was a mixture of utter shock and deep, professional alarm. Ava Harrison, he repeated. His voice barely a whisper. The nurse from the hospital, Vivian. What are you doing? I am doing what is right, I said calmly. What is right? He leaned forward, his voice rising. Vivian, you can't be serious. You are handing your entire family legacy, Robert's legacy, to a complete stranger, a woman you met 2 weeks ago in an emergency room. She is not a stranger. I said. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. He threw his pen down on the desk. It made a sharp, angry clatter. Vivian, you have to realize what will happen the moment you are gone. Edward and Paul will contest this. They will sue. They will drag this young woman's name through the mud. They will say you were not of sound mind, that you were grief-stricken, that this nurse, this stranger, took advantage of you and manipulated you. It will become a hideous, public battle. Is that the legacy you want to leave? His words were meant to scare me, to make me doubt, but they did the opposite. They solidified my resolve into something as hard and unbreakable as diamond. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. Then let it be hideous, I said, my voice low and dangerous. The truth isn't always pretty, Arthur, but it is always the truth. I am of perfectly sound mind. In fact, I am clearer now than I have been in my entire life. I looked him straight in the eye, and I am not being manipulated. I am correcting a mistake that has gone uncorrected for 30 years. He stared at me, searching my face for any sign of weakness, of doubt. He found none. He slumped back in his chair. Defeated, he knew, as I knew, that this was done. He gestured to the documents. Then, you need to sign. Here. And here. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. It felt cool and solid in my hand. It felt like a key. It felt like a weapon. It felt like a verdict. It was weighted, not with ink, but with the full measure of my life. With Robert's love and his secret, with the hollow apologies of my sons, with the kindness of a daughter I never knew I had. I uncapped the pen. The room was silent. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the seconds of my old life. I lowered the nib to the paper, and as I signed my name, Vivian Blackwood, on that final, definitive line, I did not feel a sense of loss. I did not feel anger or bitterness or revenge. I felt a profound, quiet peace settle over me. It was the feeling of putting the last piece of a puzzle into place. It was the feeling of coming home. I hadn't lost everything. I felt as if I had just gotten it all back. The reading of the will, the end, when it came, was peaceful. It was 5 years after that night in the hospital. 5 years I had lived on my own terms. The cancer came on slow and quiet, a gentle fading rather than a violent storm. I passed away in my own bed, in the sunroom, overlooking my roses. I was not alone. Ava was with me, holding my hand, not as a nurse, but as a friend, as the daughter of my heart. But my story doesn't end there. The final act was yet to play out. In a place I could only observe from a distance, the mahogany-paneled conference room of my lawyer, Mr. Davies. Imagine the scene, a long, polished table reflecting the gray morning light. On one side, my sons, Edward, in a bespoke charcoal suit, his face set in a mask of solemn grief that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked every bit the powerful CEO, waiting to claim his kingdom. Beside him, Paul, looking uncomfortable in his own suit, fidgeting with his tie. He looked sad. Yes, but it was the sadness of a man who has lost an allowance, not a mother. They were confident, entitled. This was just a formality. And on the other side of the table, sitting alone, was Ava Harrison. She was still in her blue nurse's scrubs. Mr. Davies's office had called her at the hospital, insisting she come immediately, that it was a matter of great importance. She had no idea why she was there. She looked small in the large leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was confused, intimidated, and utterly out of place. She looked at my sons with a polite nod. They barely glanced back at her, dismissing her as some minor clerical matter. Mr. Davies entered, his face grim. He was an old man, and he looked tired. He carried a single, thick envelope. He sat at the head of the table, put on his reading glasses, and cleared his throat. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice dry as old paper, "for the reading of the last will and testament of Vivian Rosewood Blackwood." He went through the usual legal preamble, clauses about debts, funeral expenses. Edward tapped his pen impatiently on a legal pad. Paul stared out the window. Then, Mr. Davies paused. He looked over the top of his glasses, first at Edward and Paul, and then at Ava. "We now come to the primary disposition of the estate," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "I will read from Article 3 of the will directly." He adjusted the document. "When the day like Vivian Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all real property, stocks, bonds, personal effects, and 100% of my controlling shares in Blackwood Enterprises." He paused again, for effect. The silence was absolute. Edward leaned forward slightly, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "To a single beneficiary, Mr. Prast," Davies continued, his eyes now fixed on Ava. "The sole heir to my entire fortune is Miss Ava Harrison." For a moment, there was no reaction. The words just hung there. Impossible and absurd. It was as if he had started reading in a foreign language. Paul was the first to break the silence. A short, confused laugh escaped his lips. "I'm sorry. What did you say, Ava Harrison? There must be a mistake." Edward didn't laugh. His face had gone rigid, the color draining from it until it was the color of old parchment. "Read that again," he said, his voice a low growl. Mr. Davies calmly read the sentence again. This time, the explosion came. "This is preposterous," Edward shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sound made Ava jump. "It's insane. She was senile. That nurse. That nobody. She obviously manipulated her," a sister Paul whispered, the realization dawning on his face with comical horror. "We have a sister." Ava was just staring at Mr. Davies, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth was slightly open. Tears were welling in her eyes. Tears of confusion, of disbelief. She looked from my son's furious faces to the lawyer's calm one, completely lost. "If you will allow me to continue," Mr. Davies said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Mrs. Blackwood anticipated this reaction. She left a letter to be read." He pulled a smaller, handwritten envelope from the larger one. "My handwriting," he began to read. "My dearest boys, if you are hearing these words, it means I am gone, and it means you have just learned that my legacy will not be yours. You will call me insane. You will claim I was manipulated, but you know the truth. You know when this decision was really made. It was made on a cold night in a hospital. When you chose a party over my life, you speak of legacy, but you never understood it. My legacy is not the company. It is the kindness and compassion that built it, and that is why I am giving it to the only person who showed me any." He paused. "I am also giving it to her because it is her birthright. Ava Harrison is the daughter of my late husband, your father, Robert Blackwood." A collective gasp went through the room. Edward looked like he had been physically struck. Paul just stared, his mind struggling to connect the dots. "That's a lie," Edward roared. "I'm afraid not," Mr. Davies said calmly. He reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out another document. "Vivian was a thorough woman. This is a legally certified DNA test, conducted 5 years ago. The results are conclusive." He slid the paper across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Edward. "She also left this." He slid a small, faded photograph next to it, a picture of a young Robert, standing next to a smiling young woman who was unmistakably Ava's mother. The fight went out of them. The rage, the bluster, it all just evaporated, replaced by a stunned, hollow silence. They stared at the documents, the final, irrefutable proof of their own undoing. They had not just been disinherited. Their entire history had been rewritten, and across the table, Ava Harrison finally let out a small, choked sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears now streaming down her face. They were not tears of joy. They were tears of a life's worth of questions being answered in the most brutal, unbelievable way possible. She had found her father and inherited a fortune. In the same devastating breath, the weight of it all, I could see, was just beginning to settle upon her. The legacy of a glass of water. If you think my story ended in that mahogany-paneled conference room, with the shouting and the tears and the rustle of papers that would change 3 lives forever, you'd only be half right. An ending, after all, is just a beginning in disguise. I watch now, from a place where time doesn't matter. And I can tell you that the reading of the will wasn't the final act. It was the curtain rising. The chaos of that day eventually settled, like dust after an earthquake. My sons, of course, fought it. They hired lawyers, the best their dwindling money could buy. And they made the accusations Arthur had predicted. They called me senile. They painted Ava as a predator, a schemer who took advantage of a grieving old woman. But the truth, as it often does, had deeper roots and a stronger foundation. The DNA test was irrefutable. My own detailed journals from those last 5 years, along with testimony from Arthur, my doctors, and my friends, painted a clear picture of my sound mind. Their challenges crumbled. They were left with nothing but their choices. The real story, the one that truly matters, is what happened to Ava. Imagine the weight of it all. In a single morning, she discovered the father she never knew and inherited a corporate empire she never wanted. For weeks, she was adrift in a sea of shock. The world saw a nurse who had won the lottery. Only I saw a daughter grappling with a ghost. A young woman handed a legacy she felt she hadn't earned. She could have sold everything. Any sensible person would have. She could have taken the hundreds of millions, disappeared, and lived a life of quiet, anonymous luxury. And for a moment, she considered it. But then, she started visiting the house. She would walk through my sunroom, touching the petals of my roses. She sat in Robert's old leather reading chair. She wasn't looking at the assets. She was searching for a connection, for the parents she had only ever known in fragments and secrets. And in that search, she found her purpose. Ava Harrison did not sell Blackwood Enterprises. Instead, she enrolled in night classes for business management. She spent her days walking the factory floors, learning the names of the machinists Robert had first hired. She listened more than she spoke. She brought to the company not the ruthless ambition of my sons, but the quiet, steady compassion of a nurse. She learned to take its pulse, to diagnose its ailments, and to heal it from the inside out. She turned the house that Robert built not into a property to be mortgaged, but a home to be protected, just as he would have wanted. And then, she did what I knew she would. She took my fortune, and she gave it away. Not all at once, not recklessly. She used the profits from a revitalized Blackwood Enterprises, now run with an integrity it hadn't seen in years, to start a foundation. The Ava Mayhew Foundation, in honor of the mother who raised her. And its first project was to build a small, free clinic for the elderly on the forgotten side of town. It was a warm, bright place with comfortable chairs, hot coffee, and a staff that was told their most important job was to listen. A place where no one would be invisible. It was her dream, the one she had shared with me over tiramisu, brought to life, and it was just the beginning. Looking back, the lessons of my life seem so clear. For all the parents out there, know this: the greatest inheritance you can leave is not your money, but your values. Love is not a blank check for your children to cash. It is a gift, and that gift must be earned, respected, and given to those who know its worth. For all the sons and daughters, please, listen. Never assume you have a limitless bank of tomorrows to make the call, to say thank you, to just show up, because one day you will dial the number, and all you will hear is silence. Presence cannot be willed to you. It must be given. And for the rest of us, living in this hurried bunder, on modern world, we measure success in stock prices and job titles. We chase the grand gestures, forgetting that life is built on small, quiet moments. In the end, all the noise fades, All that truly remains are the simple acts of human decency. Sometimes, the legacy of a lifetime, the fate of an entire fortune, can be decided by something as small as a glass of water. My name is Vivian Blackwood, and this is the story of how I gave my entire fortune to a stranger, who ended up showing me the true meaning of family. Wow, what a journey Vivian took us on. From heartbreak to a quiet, powerful victory. I'm sure this story brought up a lot of different emotions for many of us. I'd love to create a space for that down below. Tell me, which part of Vivian's story resonated with you the most? Your comments make this more than just a channel. They make it a community. If you feel like you're part of our story-loving family, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Let's grow our circle by sharing this with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. And if you're new here, subscribe to Dipucator Stories and join the conversation. We're so glad to have you. Until we meet for our next story, take care of each other.